would you be able to give me your name and your occupation, please?
Paul Radley, sports writer for the national newspaper in the UAE.
And you're in the UAE, so it means you are the center of all things
Yep.
cricket at all times, especially more so since COVID. You're probably the most popular man in the world since COVID. You're writing on everything. In fact, as we speak, I think you're preparing to head off to the IPL final as well. But I wanted to get you on to talk about Oman. You actually, I don't know if you remember this, but you were my first guest ever on this
Yes, I do
podcast.
remember that.
And yeah, and I've run out of friends, so you've had to come back on. I'm now recycling people for their second go. But yeah, I really want to talk about Oman. So when I was with Scotland, everyone was talking about, Oman, the team, but also the destination. And I sort of said flippantly, well, I've already been to UAE. I don't need to go to Oman as well. And everyone in the team from Scotland was like, no, you don't understand. Oman cricket's incredible and the facilities are great. What people just don't know this, but they've built like a cricket paradise. About 20 k's out of Muscat? Is that where it is?
Yeah, so
Muscat.
I felt exactly the same before I'd gone there. I thought, well, we're in the UAE here. We don't, you can't get better facilities for cricket. But I wouldn't say that they're better than the facilities that there are in the UAE. But the ground itself is an absolute stunner. It's at the bottom of, I think you could perhaps say it's not quite in a valley. It's like a big plain, basically, with the Hajj Mountains all sort of around it. Absolutely stunning place, and the facilities are they're absolutely awesome. Really, they've got a 7-lane indoor school, 7 lane of nets indoor school, two lovely big ovals, and then it's had a spruce up now for the World Cup that's coming up. So it's absolutely lovely place to be honest.
Uh, Talk to me about Pankaj Khimji. I'm pronouncing that correctly, am I?
As far as I'm aware, yes.
Yeah. He's a lot. You and I, obviously deal with a lot of people in associate cricket, and quite often the burning passion comes from a local person, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it comes from an Indian or Australian or New Zealander who happens to be there. But he is an Omani. If that's, I've never said that word out loud. I'm assuming that's the correct term
Yeah.
from someone from Oman. And he got into cricket he studied a little bit in India when he was younger, and then he spent 6 months selling laundry detergent in the UK.
Yeah. Well, I think he did do that, and he loved it. He lived in Bristol, and he had that job with Procter and Gamble. Basically, he was already part of the family business back in Muscat. To talk about his family, basically, they've been there for 6 generations. They're originally from Gujarat in India, and he speaks Gujarati. So the family built up this business from way back when, and I think it was 1870 when they sold there, something like that. Now they're basically the biggest employers, or I'd assume one of the biggest employers, at least certainly one of the biggest companies in all of Oman. And he was already part of the family business. He just finished his studies, basically university studies in the UK. Came back. There was the oil prices dropped, basically, so they thought that sort of the economic advance of Muscat would slow a little bit. So he wanted to learn some other skills. So he went off and worked for Procter and Gamble, who were they become agents of the company, the Khimji Ramdas company in Muscat already. So he wanted to go and sort of learn the ropes there. And they sent him off as like a traveling salesman all around the West Country in the UK. He said it was hard work. He said he was doing like 200 miles a day, every day, trying to sell fairy liquid and things like that. But he said that it was, it's the making of him, basically. He learned, learn how to run a business and be a salesman.
And I mean, he does kind of run Oman cricket
Yeah.
like a business as much as anything. He employs a lot of the players through his family's company, doesn't he? So it is very much not a one man show would be unfair, but him and his family have invested a lot of money and a lot of time, and they've got money from the government directly for Oman cricket. Without them, they're not here. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely, definitely, yeah. And it's probably a little bit different to say here in the UAE, where a lot of cricket was funded by, say, a wealthy Emirati businessman. How the Kimjis have done it is, I assume they've given some of their money along the lines, but they have petitioned and lobbied their contacts in government and got funding through the sports ministry. So yeah, obviously as captains of industry as they've been down the years, they've had a bit of sway in bringing things about. And what they've done is, within 10 years ago, they didn't have a grass cricket field anywhere in the country. Now they've only got two. But so it's really remarkable, actually, to think how good they are. They're top of the World Cup League Division 2. They've got high hopes of making it through the first round of the World Cup. To come from just having concrete wickets and sand outfields as recently as 10 years ago, and the majority of cricket is still played by recreational cricketers on fields like that. There's only obviously so many people that can get on the two grass fields there. So to have a team with justifiable ambitions of making it through to the World Cup proper it's an incredible story, really.
And for him and his family as well, like, essentially they're the first team from outside the Test nations to host and play in a T20 World Cup. We've seen that in the one days before, but Oman is. Well, I think we've all been swept up in the Thai and the Brazilian women and the Nepalese men and the Afghanistani men, these incredible stories. Oman sort of just slipped up behind everyone else. But for the people on the ground, having met a couple of them during those World Cup qualifiers, they are as passionate about this as anyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. Driven by obviously Duleep Mendis has been probably there about as long as the grass has been there. He's obviously come from a background in Sri Lanka, where it's obviously there's millions of people want to play cricket. It's not perhaps the case in Oman. So he's basically built a squad from, I think Pankaj Khimji was telling me the other day that there's probably about, at any one time, there's about 50 or 60 teams in Oman that play cricket. And obviously, there's only a few elite players that come out of that. So he's had this squad of players, Duleep Mendis, the coach, for quite a long time. You don't see too many changes in their lineup. And he's just really worked on them. They've got a couple of trainers from strength and conditioning trainers from South Africa that Duleep speaks very highly of. And yeah, it's just basically they've had a lot of focus on a particular set of players that sort of brought them to this level, really.
And there are a lot of associate coaches that use it as a stepping stone. Sometimes just to get first class jobs back in their own country, sometimes to try and get international jobs and everything. I mean, Duleep's age, I don't want to age him, but he, he's kind of at the end of his career rather than at the start, like, some of the other younger coaches coming through. I mean, if you look at some of the guys like Ryan Campbell and Shane Berger, they're like at the start of their journeys, aren't they? You're on their first or second team internationally. And so it almost feels like a good match that he's been there for 10 years. He's been able to grow them up. Eventually, they'll probably, obviously he was a brilliant cricketer for Sri Lanka when they were essentially an associate, or very early on in their time. Was involved with them in around '96. Was he the team manager in the '96
team
World
manager?
Cup?
Yeah, he's had loads of roles, but at the World Cup in '96, he was team manager. Yeah.
So I mean, you think about there's almost a level of stability that Oman cricket has been able to build, and they're also doing it a little bit like I suppose it's almost like a system similar to what the England women's team did, where they've like, okay, we have found our 15 to 20 players, and we are going to almost professionalize those players. They're the ones who we're going to put all of our time into, which means they've been able to develop. It might limit them in the future, but in the short term, it's meant that they've really been able to grow quite well. They had a good moment at the 2016 World Cup, didn't they?
Yeah, they beat Ireland. That's right. I think you're exactly right. They're trying to professionalise that team in the hope that if they have some success, like as you just mentioned, winning their game in the 2016 World Cup in India against Ireland, and then hopefully, with this amazing platform that they've got now of playing matches at home in a World Cup again. So they want obviously the team to be as good as they possibly can. So they put a lot of their focus in that rather than development of the game as yet. So they want to have this team that is, like a figure, sort of flagship that everybody can look and see, oh, we've got this team. I want to be part of that. So that will then start spreading, hopefully, I assume they're thinking success will start breeding success and attract more people to it. But they have started also that they kept a lot of the previous players that have been part of the team as coaches. So the development is spreading as a result of the focus that they put on that particular set of players.
Googlies, quarter seamer, carom, dukes, back of the hand, red, leg cutters, teesra, pink, knuckle, white, slider, seed, heavy, bouncers, cherry, length, pill, off cutters, old, crimson traveller, kookaburra, hard, outswing, second new, off spin, arm, SG, split finger, shiny, leg spin, soft, new, yorkers, flippers, wrong-uns, long hops, reverse swing, half volley, and third new. These are just some of the names we use for balls in cricket. Well, Manscaped wants you to be as proud of your balls as you are of the ones delivered by your favourite cricketer. Manscaped just launched their 4th generation trimmer, the Lawnmower 4.0. Join over 2 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with this exclusive offer, 20% off and free worldwide shipping. Insert the code REDINKA at manscaped.com. I've actually used this, not just something that I'm hawking for fun, and I got to admit, I thought it was a bit silly, and then I went down there, and it was exceptional. I honestly feel I could bowl outswing with one nut and inswing with the other. So get 20% off and free worldwide shipping with the code REDINKA at manscaped.com. Manscaped, for the man who cares about his balls as much as the ones out in the middle. And as far as the local players go, and that's a big thing with associate cricket, and you obviously, your main team that you cover is the UAE, and we've had Zoltan Zarawani, but we haven't had that many other local Emirati players, although there obviously are UAE players who are born and bred in the UAE, even if they are considered not UAE players by the local authorities. How strong are the local players in Oman at the moment, and how many of these guys are, immigrants?
So they've got one Omani national in the team, Sufyan Mahmood, and basically they had, funnily enough, researching the article I wrote recently on it, I found 10 years ago, we had done a story with a touring Omani team that had come over. And it was actually Pankaj Khimji's dad who was quoted in the story. And he said that at that time, all the local teams, like if you had a domestic cricket team, you were compelled to have one Omani national at least in your team. And that rule has sort of been dissipated a bit now. It's not the case. But I think their plan, apparently their plans were hit a little bit by COVID. They had this plan to attract, to take cricket into schools like Omani national schools and get Omani nationals playing that way. So they have got a mind to do it, but they're not going to do it in like a quota system anymore. They're just going to hope that there's going to be sort of an organic take up among Omanis.
Has Oman been good at other sports? I mean, it's just I cannot tell you how little I know about this country, other than roughly I could find it on a map.
Well, yeah, I suppose they're a little bit like lots of people in this region. That the sport of the indigenous people would be football, and Oman had Ali Al Habsi as a goalkeeper for a few Premiership teams. So that football had this massive hero that was even though it was already the sport of it, like the sport of all the Omanis. They having this great player meant that it attracted even more people. So. Other sports are just trying to pick up the cost up from football, I suppose.
And I mean, you talked about 10 years ago. I want to go back sort of before. So 10 years ago is when they first got their turf wickets, right? What were they like 20 and 25 years ago, sort of at the beginning of this journey?
What, as a team or the facilities?
Yeah. Like, I mean, no, as a team. I know they didn't have facilities.
Yeah,
They were
yeah.
concrete wickets back then. But like, how bad were they? Is Division 6 the bottom one or Division 5? I always forget. The bad division.
Yeah. So they were down there, down those reaches, and they'd win matches in that, and they'd go up and get promoted, and then they get knocked back down. And Pankaj was explaining to me the other day that it was just because they'd go. Obviously, you go to these other tournaments elsewhere, go on these tours, and obviously they couldn't host any tournaments because they didn't have grounds of their own. They'd go on these tours and they'd meet up, like the players that had been selected would meet up a week before. They wouldn't have a coach. They'd just do a bit of nets and a bit of catching practice, and they get there, and he said they were bamboozled by the turf. Because obviously the ball would do far more than it would do on a concrete wicket in Oman. And that was sort of what hamstrung them, really. So that's why they had this big push. If they really wanted to develop the game and get a better team, they had to have grass. And they initially built a net wicket block at the Khimji's family farm in a place called Barker, which is just up the coast from Muscat towards UAE, about an hour up the coast. And the players would go from Muscat 3 times a week to just have a few net sessions there. So obviously there's a reason that they were a limited side back then. And, obviously the reason that they've advanced so much is because they've got so much better facilities to work with now.
And they start to get good probably before the 2016 World Cup. So in the 5 or so years before that, they start to improve. Who are the sort of major players that they have?
They've got brilliant left-arm swing bowler called Bilal Khan, who swings the white ball more than anyone else you'd probably see. Probably reminds you a little bit of Trent Bolt, actually, I suppose. He's not quick. They've got a really exciting, really watchable, sort of effervescent opener called Jatinder Singh. He's got lots of shots and he's really expressive in terms of how he is as a person and as how he bats as well. If he gets off to some good starts, he'll be really good to watch in the World Cup. They actually, in terms of the team, I'd say they remind me a little bit, if you know the New Zealand team that had Vittoria and Oram late middle order, how if you knocked out the top 6, you still hadn't beaten them. Oman are a little bit like that. They bat very low. I think Sandeep Good, if I pronounce it name, or Goud, if I pronounce that correctly, he comes in about 8 or 9, and he's a brilliant batsman. The number of times that he'll either win games for his team from that position or get them get them back into a game that seems completely lost. He does that quite frequently, and he's batting 8 or 9. You don't often see him bowl, and they've got players at the top of the order who bowl as well. So it seems like some guys miss out, but they seem to know their roles particularly well. So yeah, they're a team, I'd say. You haven't beaten them until you've knocked them all out, basically.
Yeah, I always forget the name of this guy. I bring him up all the time. I've got to write it down on my whiteboard so I remember. But they've got a knuckleball bowler as well who bowls in the middle overs, bowls like Liam Plunkett type spells, who did quite well against Scotland actually did quite well in the World Cup in the World Cup qualifiers.
I was trying to think who that is. Just trying to think.
I have to look it up.
Not Navdeem.
But yeah, right armour doesn't bowl particularly quick, but hits the pitch hard and knows what he's doing. So I suppose the point is that when you talk about the roles, they have a lot of different players. It's not like some associate teams where there's a few talented sort of club players and they and a couple of guys who are like keeping it together. There's a lot of different skill sets in that Oman team. As you said, even just having a left arm bowler in associate cricket is a huge thing to be able to have. And again, not that many associate teams bat beyond 6 or 7 either.
Yeah, no, exactly right. They've got loads of bases covered. Even within one player, they've got this brilliant top order batsman, Akib Ilyas, who also bowls as well. Bowls useful overs, he could get through 4 overs for them, definitely. And he bowls leg spin to right-handed batsmen and off spin to left-handers. So they got a versatile player just within the one player there. But then the captain also bowls some left-arm spin, even though he bats in the top order. Yeah, they got all the bases covered. They've got leg spinner, a couple of left-arm spinners, good left-arm swing bowler, and Kalimullah is a fast bowler, right-arm fast bowler as well. Yeah, they've got all the bases covered and got lots of batting as well.
It's a tough group for them. They've got Bangladesh, obviously a test playing nation who just, made a bit of a mess of Australia and New Zealand of recent times. Scotland, who are very well suited to T20 cricket and also have a thriving club scene. And you talk about having 60 teams in Oman. Scotland probably has that many, in one suburb of Edinburgh. And PMG, who is almost an outlier in cricket in that it's almost one whole village or one whole family playing. It's not an easy group to go through. Those are very, I don't think either of the groups are particularly easy, but it's going to be tough for them to go through to the next level, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think they'd be confident. They've also had these games against Scotland in the 50 over competition last month, and Scotland beat them. But then the cyclone hit, and they didn't get to play again. But I think they'd be confident because they're flying high in that 50 over competition. They've, I don't know whether being on home soil, they might like the emotion of that might, I don't know whether that work in their favour or not. But I think they'd be confident. It's I suppose the Scotland game, like they'd definitely be confident against PNG. And then the Scotland game, I suppose, is the
Mm.
telling one. But and then Bangladesh have lost both their warm up matches, so I think they'd have a bit of belief that they could cause an upset there as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can see them winning a game. It's whether they can win the, I suppose, the two and have everything fall in
Yeah.
their favour to get through to the next level. Um, what when we talk about Pankaj Khimji, what is their plan for Oman in the future? Because it doesn't have as many cricketers as some of the other nations. It doesn't have the facilities as some of the other nations. So what is their goal over the next 5 or 10 years? Where are they aiming?
Well, they're putting a new field in, so that'll take them up to 3 turf fields.
Hey,
That's gonna be a bonus.
33% more? No, where's the 50% more, isn't it?
Yeah,
I'll
50.
do my maths later.
And then the plan is, well, I suppose Duleep Mendis will have done 10 years near enough. If they can keep him on board, keep him motivated to keep making the progress that he has done, working with this team, their stated goal is to get into the 2023 World Cup. Everybody's trying to do that though. It's going to be tricky for them, but they're doing as well as they possibly could do at the moment. That's their next major goal after this competition. And then, just like I was saying before, they're just hopeful that if they have this successful team that will attract people to the sport, that there'll be a bloom amongst in participation.
And as someone you cover cricket a lot in this area. Obviously, it's your specialty. Although, as I said before, you now cover every single team as they go. I mean, the Ashes might still end up in the UAE at this rate. Um, what's your sort of overriding thought on Oman? Are they going in the right direction, or is it going to be an uphill battle? Where do you sort of see their future from your perspective?
I think they're going. They From what they've done so far, from nothing, virtually nothing, 10 years ago to where they are now, just goes to show they can just keep developing. I suppose, the thing that's amazing about it is that it's been an unchecked rise. They haven't stopped improving till this point. And there's other teams like
Mm.
if you look at UAE, they they'll have a year or two of improvement, and then perhaps they'll change the coach or captain, and performances will dip, or maybe an important player will leave, or maybe six important players will get chucked out for corruption. They they were basically all teams. Like if you look at the Netherlands, you look at anybody. Ireland obviously have lost a lot of their, the nucleus of a
Mm.
really strong side they had all at once. So they're going through a rebuilding phase themselves. Oman haven't had that moment yet. They've just been rising and rising and rising. So I suppose the problem for them might be similar to what we are just saying about Ireland, in that these players that they've got now have brought them to this position. Some of them are early 30s, maybe mid 30s. If they all sort of go together, then what comes underneath that is going to be what really tests them, I suppose.
And in that region, is there, obviously the UAE and Oman? I'm trying to think if there's any other sort of growing cricket teams around there. Is there like a sense of bonding between all those teams, or is it? 'Cause I mean, obviously UAE have had their own problems, which I will quickly ask you on in a minute. But is there like a movement there, or is everyone kind of still on their own?
Yeah, I'd say they have, like you've probably experienced this with Scotland. All the teams do feel of that tier of cricket. They do feel a bond with each other, as because they go through a lot of the same issues in terms of what they
Yeah.
need to do to play the game. But in terms of helping each other out, I wouldn't necessarily say that that's the case. No, they've tried to organise a few games, UAE and Oman, because obviously they're so close to each other, in the lead up to this, and it just didn't end up happening. Obviously, UAE's got a lot of busy stuff happening, and then obviously with COVID, Oman was actually shut until the start of September. The borders were completely closed because of COVID, so it was pretty difficult to do. But in terms of joined up thinking together, no, I think they probably regard each other as rivals, I'd say. So yeah, don't necessarily want to help each other out too much.
No, that makes sense. And just on UAE, obviously they lost a third of their team, as I'm fond of saying, at the World Cup qualifiers. Players have been caught match fixing, and all sorts of things have happened. What's the current state of UAE cricket?
The current state of UAE cricket, you can be really optimistic about it. I'd say it's obviously they had that. That was only 2 years ago that they had the massive corruption scandal that's ended up costing them six senior players chucked out for combined total of 41 years for obviously breaches of the anti-corruption code. Since then, the profile of the team has changed massively. They had at that time they were building an under-19s team to go to the World Cup in South Africa, and it's not always been the case that a good age group setup um, manifests itself into a strong, like those players don't always follow the path that they would
Mm.
do in other countries because of lots of different things, including the visa process here. Once you get to 18, you're not on your mum and dad's visa anymore. You have to get yourself a job, or you might go abroad to study anyway. So a lot of those players who are talented would get lost to the system. In the past 2 years, because of the consequences of the six players being chucked out, they've had to give the young players a chance in the first team straight away because there's not a huge amount of other choices, and they put a lot of work into these players anyway. So they might as well, try and see the fruits of that. And these guys have really proven that they can do it. There's some very promising young players knocking around here, which is good. And then there are other players that come through the more sort of established route of UAE cricket, which is basically people coming over from Pakistan to play in a staff team, end up being good, and staying here for 3 years, and then they're eligible to play. Like UAE have just got this unbelievably brilliant opener called Mohammed Wasim, who scored 100 against Ireland in a run chase. They beat Ireland they had a 3-match series, and they were awful in the first one, UAE, and then absolutely thrashed Ireland in the 2 games after that. And this guy Wasim in the match that clinched it in Dubai scored 100 when they were chasing 135 to win the game. He scored 77% of the runs, and he is absolutely brilliant. And he's come through the way, like he's been here for just over 3 years, whatever it is, the eligibility that you did need to do on residency. And there'll be the odd player that comes through that way, but unlike before in the past. So it's a really long-winded way of answering your question, Derek. Um, there will be young players more so than there have been in the past as well. So I think things are really looking good for the UAE team.
Beautiful. And just to finish up on Oman, then, w- they're going to be hosting this tournament. I think you and I both know that it's not really the major part of the tournament. It's basically another round of qualifying as much as anything. But the ICC have put it together so it looks better, and they can pretend there are more teams in the tournament. But if you're in Oman and you're a casual sports fan, and Oman are playing in a World Cup at home, they're hosting it. There's a chance, isn't there, of actually catching fire a little bit within the community in Oman in general? Is that I'm assuming that's the hope of Pankaj Khimji and Oman cricket.
Yeah, they must be, people living in Oman and Omani nationals, it might be different people from different backgrounds. When they see that it's going on, it's a World Cup on their doorstep. Definitely, they're going to they're going to show an interest. I think that one thing is the ground. It's in a little town called Al Emirat, which is about 25 minutes outside Muscat. So it's not like you're going to get too much passing traffic. But to be honest, the ground it's only going to have, with temporary stands, it's going to have 3,000, 4,000 people, and I reckon it'll be sold out every day, especially because, Bangladesh play. Whenever they go anywhere, they take loads of fans with them. And there are a lot of Bangladeshis in Muscat. When I was there last month, the guy in my hotel cleaning the rooms, he came up to me and he goes, sir, Safiullah, is it Safiullah from Bangladesh? He lives near where I'm from, back home. I was like, oh, right, that's interesting. Why are you telling me this? How do you know that I know anything about cricket? Because I saw your pass that I had for the matches that were there. And and he was saying, I said to him, oh, Bangladesh come for the World Cup? He goes, yeah, I know. He goes, I'm hoping I can get a day off and go and watch them. So I think the ground will be as packed as it can be, and it'd be absolutely brilliant for Oman. Hopefully it'll have a lasting effect.
Beautiful. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast, Paul. Again.
Top man. Thanks for having me, Jarrod.